All right, so we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone, and really thank you for joining us tonight. This is the second webinar in our virtual job fair professional development series. This one's called Organizing Your CV and Interview Practice. We'd like once again to thank the AAST, the East, and the SEC PDS for sponsoring these webinars, and appreciate their ongoing collaboration with the AAST's Associate Member Council. My name is Matt Strickland. I'm an assistant professor of surgery at the University of Alberta in Canada. I'm also the treasurer for the Associate Member Council for the AAST. And then I'm going to be moderating with my co-moderator, Linda Dultz. Dr. Dultz is an assistant professor of surgery at UT Southwestern Parkland and is also the secretary for the AMC of the AAST.
All right, thanks, Matt, so much. So before we get started with the program, Matt, can you just go one slide forward?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so before we get started, we just want to take a moment to remind everyone in attendance that this webinar is a series of 3. So this is the second one, and the third webinar will be on October 14th at 6 p.m. Central Time, and that's going to be different practice setups for acute care surgery. One of the requests we heard from doing these is people asking us to hear about how ACS practices are run in the community and rural areas and academic practices. And so that one's, I think, is going to be a nice discussion with a diverse group of panelists. And then finally, the job fair itself, supported by all 3 of our sponsoring organizations, East, AAST, and SEC PDS, will be November 11th and 12th of this year. It was really successful last year and really well received. And so we're hoping to replicate that success this year. And so just to briefly go over the agenda for tonight. So we're going to have Dr. Fariha talk about tips on organizing your CV. And then that's going to be followed by a few comments by Dr. Sakran. And then Dr. Sakran is going to be talking about how to interview well, followed by some comments by Dr. Sheikh.
All right, so I'll start off by introducing Dr. Fariha. She's going to be our first speaker. She's an assistant professor in the Division of Trauma, Critical Care, and Acute Care Surgery. Is attending within the Rutgers New Jersey Medical School system, Northern New Jersey. She graduated from the surgery program at Dartmouth Hitchcock, and then did a fellowship in surgical critical care in Honolulu at the University of Hawaii. And she's currently the assistant program director for the surgical residency program. And then, Linda, do you want to introduce your good friend?
Yeah, I will introduce Dr. Joe Sakran, who I was maybe fortunate or unfortunate enough to train with at Hopkins, but I will only say good things right now. So Dr. Sakran is an associate professor at Johns Hopkins. He's currently the director of EGS and also the associate chief of the division there. Did his general surgery residency at Inova, and then trauma critical care fellowship at UPenn. Also holds a MPH from Hopkins and a master's in public administration from Harvard. And we're fortunate enough to have both these guys speak tonight.
Great, so without further ado, I'll turn over to Dr. Sheikh, and I'll stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
Thank you. Good evening. I just want to thank AAST and East and SEC PDS for letting us join you this evening. So as was stated, I'm going to be talking about organizing your CV. I'm a relatively new attending. I've been in practice for a little under 2 years. So I'm, still familiar with the process that, going through applying for a new job and getting your CV ready. So hopefully I can offer some advice through my recent experience. Just before getting into the CV, I wanted to touch upon some things. One, I just wanted to talk about the fact that people are transitioning from being a resident to a fellow and then to the level of an attending, and that's really exciting. People who are going through this process right now, you've worked so hard to get to that point. It's a really gratifying time because there's a light at the end of the tunnel. At the same time, I totally understand that it can be a little bit terrifying because now you're entering this a whole other realm of a whole different level of responsibility. and you're taking everything on your own. But it's still a great moment to be in, and you have a whole world of possibilities ahead of you. So enjoy this time while you're looking for a job, your first job. And when I was creating the slides, I was doing a little background research. Just a little interesting tidbit. US News has this ranking of professions overall. And surgery, you can see listed here, it's listed as number 2 for best paying jobs, which is not surprising. It's number 16 in overall best healthcare jobs. And for all professions, it's rated number 42. So not as high as expected, but I think some of that has to go into what's listed on the side here. So there are certain things, I put this out because there's certain things that we have relatively little control over, and that's salary, job market, and future growth. But the things that we do have control over are stress and work-life balance. And I think that's really important when you're looking for your first job. Just something to really keep in mind, because I think that those are the 2 things that can really bring you down. But if you learn how to manage that well, then really that ranking should go up, because being a surgeon is a great thing. Okay, so just some quick things to consider when you're preparing your CV and looking for your first job. A lot of times we talk about gearing up your CV for academics or private practice. In reality, a lot of private practice or community practices are actually more of a hybrid. There are plenty of places where you have the opportunity to teach residents and students. Although the true academic centers are more heavily involved in research. But just because you're not at an academic center doesn't mean that you won't be involved in education if you want to be. The other thing to really look for is location. This is the one time you're done with training, you're not tied to a match system, so you can have that ability to choose where you want to practice. And you also want to think about the size of practice, whether you want to be part of a big group or a small group, and that'll play into the type of schedule that you're involved in. The thing that was most important to me when I was looking for my first job was the mentorship that would be involved in my first job. I think this is super important, and I'll touch upon that a little bit later. And then in terms of research, so this plays into whether or not you are going into an academic practice, how much time you want to dedicate to research. These are some of the things that you think about. But overall, when you're thinking about all of this and getting ready to prepare your CV, you have to start thinking about it relatively early. So I started getting my CV and cover letter ready just before the fall during my fellowship year. So you want to get this all arranged at least like 6 to 9 months ahead of time before you graduate, because you have to go through the interviewing process, and then you go through the process of accepting a job. And from there, you have to prepare your paperwork for credentialing and your paperwork to get a state license. And all of that can take several months. And especially in today's world where with COVID, where all the paperwork is getting delayed, everything has to be done well ahead of time. So prepare your CV ahead of time, prepare your cover letter ahead of time. Okay, so now let's go into preparing your CV. Obviously, you want to keep it professional and simple, simple fonts and no crazy colors or anything like that. Everything should be set up with a logical timeline, meaning be consistent. So if you're going to be listing, for example, your publications, whether it's old to new or new to old, just keep it all consistent. More importantly, you want to account for all gaps of time. So whether that's gaps during training or gaps during working or education, always account for any gap of time in your CV. So everything is very honest and forward. Obviously include your name, your current title, and your contact information. Then you want to move into your education. So start with your undergraduate, then graduate, and then talk about your postgraduate training. So you want to list your internship, your time during residency, and then your fellowship information. And you also want to include any research fellowships. So again, that's going to be an example of a gap of time in your clinical training, but you definitely want both highlight your research and include that time overall. Moving forward, you want to also include appointments at institutions. So most residents and fellows don't necessarily have an appointment just yet. But for example, when I was a resident, I moonlighted at the VA. So I included that as an appointment at an institution. So you may or may not have that item to list in your CV, but if you do, go ahead and list it. You want to include any licensures, so state licenses that you already have, your DEA and current CDS. That's also important to list. You also want to include certifications. So include whether or not you have your FES and FLS certification, assuming you do if you're graduating. And then your certification for ACLS, BLS, ATLS, and PALS with all the dates associated with it. Next, you want to go list your memberships and organizations such as the AAST, EAST, the American College of Surgeons. List all of those organizations. And next, you want to list any leadership roles. So this is important, right? It's always great to highlight your ability to function in leadership roles. So if you're involved with any leadership, both at the hospital level or GME level, in addition to committees on these national organizations, it's really important to list and highlight the roles that you're playing in all of these different areas. And then you also want to list any honors or awards that would date back to, I would say, medical school. The following section can include any grant support. So if you do have an extensive background in research, you do want to list grant support that you may have. This comes into play, especially if you're applying for an academic position. And you certainly want to highlight grants that you've obtained in the past. And if you do have an NIH bio sketch prepared, also great to have that ready to go. The next section should be publications. And so you always want to have your name bolded and underlined wherever that may be within the publication. And you can divide this up. So first you want to list manuscripts. So anything that's published in PubMed, you want to have your PubMed ID number there listed, or if there's an NIH link, you want to have that included as well. The next section can be that you want to include is book chapters. Any book chapters that you've been involved with, list those as well. And then any other miscellaneous publications. The next section should be presentations. And again, this can be broken up. So the first section can be scientific. So if you presented any oral presentations, poster presentations at any scientific meetings, you want to list this here. And then the next section could be professional. So for example, a lot of times as a chief resident or as a fellow, you'll be asked to present at a grand round. So these are some of the items that you want to list as your professional presentations. And then you can list any additional activities such as major like roles in community service and whatnot. Sometimes there's a question that will come up as far as should you include a link for LinkedIn or ResearchGate. I discussed this with some of my partners, and I think generally it's okay for you to leave these items out. I don't think that they need to be included in your CV. You can go ahead and forego that. Next, I just wanted to touch upon a cover letter. So, get an idea, a general idea of what kind of job you are looking for so that you can focus on what's important to you. And then so you can kind of generate a baseline cover letter based on what you're focusing on. For example, if you're finishing up your critical care fellowship and you decide that you don't want to have robotics incorporated into your first job. So, then you want to avoid applying to the positions that are going to have that as a requirement, right? Or let's say you're trying to figure out the balance that you want for trauma and emergency general surgery and critical care, right? If you want a good balance of all three, then focus on jobs that have that balance. Or if you don't want to use the critical care component, then again, you want to focus on jobs that will have a higher component of trauma and emergency general surgery. So kind of base your foundation of your cover letter on that information. But once you figure out where you're applying, you then have to make your cover letter specific for each job. So for example, when you find the job that you're applying for, you want to prepare that cover letter and you want to describe why you're a good fit specifically for them, why they are a good fit for you, and then how you plan to work together to accomplish the goals that you have set out for yourself. And some advice that my mentor gave to me was that you want to check, and then recheck to make sure that you're sending the correct cover letter to the correct job. You don't want to mix those things up. And then just some final advice. You don't have to have every single aspect or detail figured out before getting your CV ready and kind of looking for jobs. You just want to have a general idea of what you want. You can still interview at a range of different institutions and programs. But I think the really important things are to get advice, right? So as you go through the interview process, or even before you start looking, talk to attendings at your institution, talk to your mentors from residency and from fellowship, and even recent graduates that you know of who are going into the same field as you. Get their take on what the current system involves. But I think probably the most important advice I can give overall is that when you are looking for your first job, you want to make sure that you have the support of your senior partners, because no matter how many years you train for, especially in trauma, you are definitely going to see things that you've never seen before, and you're going to want that help and support to make those decisions, whether it's on the floor or in the unit or in the operating room, or even just career advice in general. So you want to make sure that you choose a place where you are going to have that support, and just be true to yourself, right? Know what you want, know what's going to make you happy, and again, enjoy this moment because you worked really hard to get here. That kind of sums up everything up. I just wanted to thank Dr. David Livingston, who helped me with the slides, and all the partners that I work with and the residents I work with. It makes it really worth it to have this job. And there's my contact information if anyone has any questions. Dr. Sakran, if you have anything you want to add from your point of view, that'd be great.
Awesome. Thanks so much. That was great. Just a couple kind of things as I was thinking about as you were going through, was a really nice kind of logical overview, both of how to kind of look at your CV, but also think about how you're going to kind of package that when you send it to different institutes. One of the things that I think, and this is maybe more important as you continue your faculty job, is periodically keeping your CV updated. I try to do it like once a quarter, because I think what happens is you'll be surprised as to the amount of things that you're going to forget that will then not get populated, and you want to be able to get credit for the real things that you're actually doing. The format is often confusing, I think, for a lot of people, and I think you have to be as a fellow, you really have, I think, a lot of flexibility, because you can really pretty much send it in almost any format that you think makes sense. But once you get to your institute, most institutes are going to have a specific format. And so our format at Hopkins is very specific, as I'm sure many of you have your own specific kind of ways that you have to put it together. And so that will change once you get to your home base, so to speak. It's really, really critical that you're accurate. There's nothing worse than seeing, a sloppy CV that doesn't have the right numbers, or has grammatical errors. It just looks like, it just makes you look really bad. So take really, the extra couple of hours to go through very carefully and make sure things are in order. The other thing is, I think especially early on, I tend to see that there's a lot of stuff that people try to put on their CV to try to bulk it up. I think most people understand that when you're starting out, you're not gonna, have a lot of different things, and that's okay. I think it's better to have really kind of concrete quality, material and items on your CV versus trying to make stuff up that don't really bring a lot of substance. And those can come out in your interviews, and it can be kind of embarrassing. So just be careful of that. There's a lot of different ways that you can think about how you're going to form the citations when you're actually putting your publications on. Typically, you can use MLA or APA style for listing publications. I would say that humanities, so fields like philosophy and history and language, they often follow the MLA style, while science and engineering typically follow APA. And I think most of us use a reverse chronological order. So starting with the most recent publication and then list the rest in descending order until you get to the first work you've published. Finally, I'll just say, and I got this email recently, Dr. Brittany Kendall had sent an email to a couple of us asking about media and how we kind of put that on there, or should we put that on there? And I think that's an important piece, because what we're starting to find is, our generation of, surgeons and healthcare professionals are coming up through the ranks, are doing a lot more out of the box type work, whether it's writing opinion pieces or, doing things, other types of engagements with the media. All of those things should be put on your CV if they're, related to, science and healthcare and what you're doing, because, institutes are starting to look at how do we, give credit for the folks that are out there doing this type of work. That is honestly very different than what we've seen in the past. And I think we're still in the phase where we're still trying to learn, like, what does all this mean? How do you categorize it? And how do we put it down in a way that allows the person who's investing all this time to get credit for it, but also to help move the field forward. So I would say, and again, I'm a little bit biased, but I would say you probably should include the stuff that's pertinent around that. So maybe I'll stop there. And I know that we're going to have time for questions at the end, but I don't know if Dr. Dultz or Strickland have other things to add.
Yeah, no, I thought those are all like fantastic points. And I agree as well with the media. I'm definitely not as engaged as you or Dr. Kendall, but some of my small media things I have started to put on my CV as well, because I have had other people tell me that as well, to start putting it on my CV. And then just another side note, I thought it was a fantastic talk. The only thing I would add as well is make sure to have your mentor or somebody else more senior look over your CV before sending it out. I think, if you're in a fellowship, find your fellowship director and have them look over your CV. There is nothing wrong with it. In fact, they should be supporting you. They should be wanting to help you get the best job possible. And so, just get your draft together of your CV and send it to a bunch of different people and get feedback. But on that end, I will let Dr. Sakran go and talk about how to interview well.
Thanks. And let me just share the screen. And as I share the screen, I'll just say, Matt Martin sent me a text and said, way to set an example, because I'm in scrubs and I'm not shaving. So don't follow, I guess, my example. Thank you, Matt, for always speaking the truth.
It's part of the work-life balance, right?
Yeah, you'll have to forgive me because I'm on call, but Dr. Martin, as usual, he is correct. Do you all see let me see here. Do you all see a full screen? Is that good?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, look, so I'm going to take a little bit of a different kind of route here and talk about, the interview process. And, let me just start out by saying that I know a lot of surgeons are going to, you're going to look at some of these things, and I've talked about some of these different perspectives in different forms. And a lot of surgeons kind of think some of these aspects are kind of a little bit foo-foo, soft skills. But what I'll submit to you is that they're really important, not just for the interview process, but I think for your career in general. So, again, take what I say with a grain of salt, but I do think that a lot of these skills are about being able to communicate your message and being able to build relationships and really kind of, achieve whatever it is that you're personally passionate about. I don't have any disclosures, and the only thing I'll say is that you're going to hear a lot of opinions. And I just say this because I'm not necessarily telling you that this is the only way or this is even the right way. I'm just giving you some tidbits and some things that I've learned over the years that I think have been helpful. And as I like think about the process, really, I think about it in three different ways. I think the first is the preparation phase. It's so critical to prepare. The second is the practice phase. And the third is the performance of the interview. And I'm going to go through each one of these. And again, this is meant to be very practical, and I'm going to try not to go too long so we can really save most of the time for discussion. Preparation is really the key. You never want to go into, an interview unprepared. It will clearly show. It makes you more nervous. It really will make you look bad. The preparation is so important. And I love this saying by the Roman philosopher Seneca, where he says, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And I think what he means is that, in other words, like luck favors the prepared. And so, lucky individuals are prepared individuals. And I think the first part of being prepared is trying to figure out what your purpose is. What's the why? And some of you have probably seen this Simon Sinek talk where he talks about the why, the how, and the what. And his point is that, when you look at really successful organizations, the reason they're successful is not because they tell you how they're going to do something, they tell you why they're going to do it. And that's the purpose. And so if you can get people to believe in what you believe in, you're going to really sell them, right? And that's going to be so critical because each of you have these goals and objectives that you're trying to achieve. And you have to be able to figure out, okay, how do I articulate that and communicate that in a way that resonates? And this really kind of, gets to what many of you have heard about and maybe even have, which is called the elevator pitch, right? This is, for those that don't have this yet, everyone should have one. It's about a 30-second to 1 minute pitch that you can pretty much give anywhere. And really, you can break it up in a variety of different ways. But the first is to identify who you are, right? And that's really the goal of the pitch, right? It's this introduction about you as a person. You're trying to very quickly establish a connection. And then you want to really talk about, your experiences and really describe what you do professionally, and then focus on some of the strengths that really have been demonstrated by your accomplishments. And then, of course, understanding that all of the work that we do is really, I think, dependent on multidisciplinary teams and people that we have in our life that continue to guide us, always, figuring out how to engage that in your pitch with, an ending that really kind of elicits a thought or question with the person that you're speaking with. And that provides them an opportunity to respond. So this is going to be so critical because regardless of where you interview, everyone is going to ask you, or perhaps start out with like, hey, tell me about yourself. And it is perfect if you've, practiced, an elevator pitch that you can then, deliver as an initial opening that is cohesive, that's concrete, and that really identifies who you are. But that's only a small part of the preparation. You really have to understand the organization that you're going to be interviewing in. These organizations are complex, they're large, they have all sorts of moving pieces. So really doing your homework to understand the organization, how it functions within the community, how the job that you're interviewing for is described in that setting is really going to be critical. And it's going to show when you go interview, and it'll also prompt other questions and thoughts that come up based off what you've read and the people that you've talked to. The other, piece that I'll just say is there's always going to be kind of a list of questions that you're going to get at almost any type of interview. Here's just an example of like top 10 interview questions, but you can come up with your own list, right? And maybe there are things more specific even to trauma critical care as our specialty in general. But come up with this list. And it's going to be important to come up with this list because, the preparation piece that you're doing and all of this stuff that you're putting together, you're going to need to practice it, right? You need to practice it because I can tell you that most of these people that you're seeing that are doing these incredible interviews, they're not doing them cold. they're spending a significant amount of time practicing. And look, some people need more practice than others, and that's okay, right? We all have different kind of innate abilities, but all of us can reach a point where we interview very smoothly if we put in the time and the effort. And this really starts like the first thing is really kind of rehearsing with yourself, practicing your elevator pitch. And usually I tell people to do it in front of a mirror, because most people don't like to do it, but either like do it in front of a mirror or record yourself. You will notice, different things that you do with your hands, or how you're looking, or what you're looking at. All of those pieces are so critical to kind of helping fine tune how you're perceived. And that's going to be so important. Once you've really achieved this kind of comfort level of going through different questions, practicing your elevator pitch, the next step, and I've done this in a variety of different programs, not just specifically for, interview for faculty jobs, but a lot of other different programmatic applications where I do mock interviews with people. And I usually will do them as panel interviews. And you'll be surprised, or maybe you won't be surprised, but they are incredibly beneficial because it really, for the first time, allows the interviewee to practice what they've been working on. And you can really work out the kinks. This is so critical because 90% of communication is actually nonverbal. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So it's not just about what you're saying, but it's also about how you're saying it. And, the utilization of your hands, which of course elicit emotion. All of these pieces factor in, right, to how this person that's sitting across from you is going to judge you. Most people, within 30 seconds, they've kind of made up their mind about you, believe it or not. The last piece is, I think the fun piece. It's fun if you've done the preparation and the practice. And this is, what I call the performance, right? So this is the actual interview. So a lot of these things that you see here on the screen, a lot of you are going to look at this and say, oh, this is so basic, but you'd be surprised as to how often people mess these simple things up, right? You really want to dress to impress. As Dr. Martin has already pointed out, you don't want to follow this example, right? You really, what you wear should be appropriate, obviously professional. You want to practice good hygiene and present yourself the way the company, is going to want you in their workplace. It is so critical. The other piece is like being on time. You want to make sure you arrive at least 10 minutes early to the interview. You'll be surprised how many people will show up late or like right on the dot. They're going to appreciate the timeliness and being prompt. And it'll also give you a chance to just take a deep breath and go over what your responses are to the questions, as well as, kind of make sure that you just feel and look good. It's so critical versus you rushing at the last minute. It just makes you look like a nervous wreck. We kind of briefly talked about the nonverbal communication. And you can see this example of different facial expressions. When you're having these interactions with folks, you really want to be careful to make too many facial expressions. Of course, one of the keys is to obviously smile. You want to smile. That sends off a lot of positive energy. But people are going to say things that you're going to be surprised at, or maybe even annoyed at, or don't like. And it's your job to really kind of hold back all those cues, because you don't want to give away your hand, because that goes into kind of the whole negotiation piece, which is beyond the scope of this discussion. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Sit upright, be open with your posture, look interested in the questions that the interviewer is asking you. Those are going to be so critical. And then the last piece on this slide is being respectful and really understanding kind of the manners that hopefully many of our parents taught us growing up. This is not only important for the people that are interviewing you, but everyone that you interact with. The entire time you are there is a test, whether it's out to dinner or the next day. And how you interact with the admins and the ancillary staff is so critical. I have a friend who was interviewing for the astronaut program, and one of the things he told me is that what NASA does is they send someone to speak with every person that individual has interacted with from the time they leave their house till the time they arrive at the NASA interview station. So the Uber driver, the hotel person, everyone they've interacted with. And because they're trying to see what type of person you are. And I can tell you that numerous times I've had situations where the admin says, gosh, that person was so disrespectful. And it's unbelievable to think that that would happen, but it happens all the time. People are testing you, they're watching you. So just be cognizant of that and essentially treat people the way you want to be treated. The energy that you're going to bring is going to be so critical. People are going to know, are you happy to be there? You know, are you miserable? And that's very relevant often before you even say a word. So remember to smile, you know, remember to be positive, and just, you know, kind of keep as positive an attitude you can during that process. Those days can be long, they can be tiring, but you just got to bring your A game. I think perhaps the most important thing is integrity. And I think this is important for, of course, the way we conduct ourselves all the time. But when you're thinking about, you know, the interview process and how people engage with you, interact with you, you have to be honest. Even if you end up not taking those positions, these are individuals in this very small community that are going to be your colleagues for your career. And these are relationships that you're building. I have so many different, you know, mentors that I've met along the way that I've never worked with clinically. And that's because whether I interviewed with them or I engaged with them in different ways across some of our organizations, the integrity and the honesty is so critical. And sometimes we can be put into awkward situations. It's just always important to really just, you know, hold a high moral ground and make sure everything you're saying is very clear and open and transparent. The last thing I just want to say is that it's always nice to send thank you notes. I think most of the time we're doing this by email. If you're really on top of it and you can get a handwritten note out, that's like definite like brownie points, but not if it arrives 3 months later, right? It has to be relatively soon. And speaking of timing, I would say don't send the thank you notes like right after you leave. Sometimes I'll get them as like the person is walking out of the office. That just shows that like you're just checking a box. Like take some time to kind of reflect on the day, and in your note, like, you know, mention that like, hey, I really, you know, enjoyed this portion of, you know, the day, you know, thanks for meeting me, blah, blah, blah. If you just send it afterwards and it's just kind of like an afterthought, it's going to show. And sometimes that just, you know, doesn't resonate well. So I'm going to stop there. I know we're going to have time for questions, but thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate all of you allowing me to share some of this time with you. Thank you.
That was great. Thanks enormously, Dr. Sakran and Dr. Sheikh. We've got a few questions coming in. And so, you know, for the next 20 minutes or so, this is just a good chance to ask our two panelists their opinion on any of these topics or more general questions. I'm going to, I'll start us off with one, and it's sort of topical over the last 2 years. What about virtual interviews? More and more of these are happening via Zoom, online platforms. Any must-dos, can't-dos that this has introduced into the process?
So I can start with that. I mean, I think a lot of the same tenets as we talked about for the in-person interview. The one thing I would say is try to avoid the virtual backgrounds. They're often can make your head look grainy and they can be distracting. So, you know, not my background, but I think the three of you have decent backgrounds. Usually the less busy, yeah, Matt, yours is a little bit busy, but I would say definitely the ladies of the group definitely have the best backgrounds. So it's not like, you can tell like Linda's background is not super busy. She has some nice artwork, you know, a bookcase, little boxing glove, you know, as does Fariha. So like, you know, something simple. The other thing is, you know, and this kind of sounds funny, but like, especially for like men, like don't do your interview in boxers. You know, we've seen like sometimes like, you know, someone like get up to like grab something off the bookshelf and you can like notice that they're wearing boxers and not a full suit to dress professional. I don't know, Fariha, do you have anything else that you think you can add to that?
No, I completely agree. Yeah, keep the background as relatively simple as you can. Although I think the bookshelves in the back with the books are just fine for Dr. Strickland. I'm not bothered by it. Yeah, and obviously dress professionally. And then try to test out like the system beforehand, because I know when we've been doing a lot of interviews for fellowship and whatnot, there have been a lot of glitches here and there. So just make sure you test it out beforehand and make sure everything's working as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. There's nothing worse than a logistical glitch at the last minute.
I've got to say that one of the things I've come to realize, certainly the medical students here are being coached pretty strongly for the residency interviews, which are all over Zoom, to get good lighting. And I'm not claiming to exactly practice what I'm preaching right now, but a lot of them are sort of buying these setups so that they don't look like they're in the shadows, and it's just sort of putting your best foot forward.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I have not done this, but I have seen this as well. You know, you can get one of these, things off of Amazon or something that, basically, put you in your best light, and you put it right behind your computer or camera and stuff. And so I think a lot of people are being coached to do that, which I don't necessarily think is a bad idea. I mean, I think it's something to try as well. Like all of you said.
It's a great idea, actually. I have one in my other office, and it really does actually make a difference to make sure, especially if you're in a very dark office, that like they can see your face, and they're very cheap. They're like, I don't know, like $20. I mean, some maybe even cheaper.
Yeah.
And I think get a job of it. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, I agree with you guys. I think, it depends on what position you're interviewing for, but, if it's going to be that you're a medical student or resident or a fellow interviewing for, a position, or then I would probably just keep your background as simple as possible, because you really want people just to focus on you and to focus on, the content that you're providing. And they don't want, you don't want them to be distracted by, whatever I have in the background. If it's more of a, peer-to-peer type of interview, that may be a little different, because then you can talk about some other things. But for other types of positions, I would just keep your background as simple as possible. Obviously, all of us here are providing the best examples right now. I have one more question, and then we can open it up to some other people. So for your CVs, is for both of you. So what do you think about providing personal information on your CV? Because I have seen it done in the past, and definitely have had controversy over it. And,
That's a good question. Sorry, by personal information, what do you mean?
So, if you're married, what your spouse does, if you have children, their age, kind of going into some details about that.
Yeah, good question. I don't really think there's a role for it on your CV. I think that can be left out. I think the CV should really focus on you and your career. I think that the personal aspect can be left out. I think that's a bit distracting and not really relevant per se. So I would leave that out.
I totally agree with that, and I would add something else, which is I don't put my personal address or phone on my CV. Because these CVs get like, if you're giving a talk, sometimes they upload your CV into, some web. And so again, especially in this day and age, putting just your hospital address and contact and email is kind of where I leave it for the most part. But maybe there's other people on the call that have a different perspective of it.
No, I agree with you guys. I mentioned it because it recently came up for me, and I noticed it, and it created some controversy. And so I was curious as to what your opinions were, but I don't know if Matt, you have a different opinion.
No, I remember a time when I used to, in a previous life working as an engineer, putting little interests or the interest in hobbies, eating cookies, and some people commented positively. I don't know, I never got the jobs for those who didn't, but I would do it anyway. Yeah. We've got some questions from Alejandro Quindil that are interesting. One is about what about case logs as a new graduate? So applying for that first job or maybe even a fellowship, but important or not important, should you come equipped with that sort of information in hand?
So I can just say, here's where I think case logs are going to be important. They're going to be important to keep count of them for different applications, whether it's like for the American Board of Surgery or also I believe the Fellowship for the American College of Surgeons also requires that. So from that perspective, I think that's going to be important. I've never been, almost all general surgery residents, right? They have a standard number of cases that they have to meet in order to graduate. I've never been asked, during any of my interviews, like, hey, how many cases did you do? So I don't know, maybe there's some other perspectives for you if you have thoughts about that.
I agree with you. I think that, by the time people are interviewing for jobs, we all know that they should have met a certain requirement. And I think that it's not necessarily like a number that you need to list out there. I don't think it's
Okay, so then let me get some other questions here. So sometimes interviews are conducted with a group of faculty all at the same time. Any tips on handling these anxiety-provoking scenarios?
I think that's a really good question. So one of the biggest things I had to adjust to when I was interviewing for jobs, as opposed to interviewing for, let's say, residency or fellowship, when you're interviewing for trainee positions, you have other people interviewing alongside you, as opposed to when you're interviewing for a job, it's just you interviewing for that position. And so, for example, when we're going out to dinner with the other faculty, sometimes that can be really intimidating, especially for someone like me, right, who's really shy. You want to feel as comfortable as you possibly can. So I think some of the things that help with that, Dr. Sakran had mentioned doing some mock interviews, and I think kind of putting yourself in that situation a little bit before, and maybe gather with some of the attendings at your current institution. Try to get familiar with just being you, the sole person who's talking to multiple other faculty members. I think that's really helpful because you don't want to get there, you don't want it to be awkward and have these silences. Luckily, a lot of times when there are multiple people who kind of know each other, they keep the conversation going. But you also want to feel comfortable to be engaged in that conversation.
All right, here's an interesting question. It's submitted anonymously, so it's got to be a bit controversial. With all the canceled meetings and conferences over the past 2 years, there was, at least on Twitter, a pretty heated debate, as heated as you can get on Twitter, about whether or not you should list that and how you should list them. And so some people are arguing essentially that they should be listed with the notation of canceled due to COVID. What's your take? Should they be left off because you didn't perform, or can you still get honorable mention?
Look, I'm not sure there's a right answer for this. I suppose it would be fine if I saw it listed with that kind of, asterisk. I personally have not listed them. They end up getting listed when you publish the manuscript. So, I think that's an incentive to kind of follow through with the presentations, which we all know sometimes that doesn't happen, and it ends kind of at the podium. But I'm not sure that there's a right answer, that I have a right answer at least, but that's personally what I've done.
All right. Oh, Fariha, do you have?
No, I was just going to say that's interesting. It never even occurred to me. I didn't even realize the debate was ongoing about that. But I agree. I think if you're going to plan to publish something, I would just list it as the publication and forego the presentation. That never happened.
Okay, I'll keep another question. So how do you research a potential employer in advance of an interview? And do you need to have familiarity with the contract in advance of the initial interview? I imagine this could be hard to do, but could help direct questions about compensation, practice mix, fit, etc.
So I can take that real quick, and then Dr. Sheikh can add to it. I think in this day and age, it's relatively easy to research about an employer because of something called Google. That, like, honestly, you can find out so much about what's happening at a place. But the other part of finding out about a place is tapping into the networks that we all have. And if you don't personally know someone at a place, I am sure that there's someone in your network that does. And there's easy ways to find that out, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook, and you can see who's mutual and then speak to those individuals. That is usually, one of the most valuable kind of pieces of intel that you can get is just, a behind the scenes conversation of what's happening at the Institute. And then in regards to like the contract, we didn't get into content as we were discussing interview process, but the first interview, I would say, is not about contracts. It's not about salary. It's about just like getting to know the people and seeing like, hey, do I like them and do they like me? That's really what it's about, and building that relationship. So I usually don't get into any of that on the first interview.
Yeah, I think it's like Dr. Sakran said, it's really easy to get background information on different institutions right now, and also like each individual surgeon, even to see where people train. Everything is pretty much listed online. You can get that information really easily. And I know when I was going through the interview process, I looked up each and every individual that I was going to be interviewing with, where they trained, what research they did, read papers. You want to get a sense as much as you can of the people that you're going to be meeting. I think that also helps with you just feeling comfortable knowing some of that information. But also it comes off as when you're actually in the interview, it demonstrates your interest in the program that you're interviewing with, which I think is really important. And even from the other side, for example, when I interview people for fellowship, you can kind of tell who's done their background research and who hasn't. And I think that it comes off really nicely in a positive way. The more somebody has done that research, it shows that they are really interested and motivated to wanting to be working.
Yeah, and can I just really quickly put a quick plug in, because I think part of this, a lot of us always feel siloed in our institution, that we don't necessarily have that network, or we can't, find other people or ask about, other institutions and stuff. I think it's a great opportunity if you're young and starting out to get involved in any of the mentorship programs that any of these organizations have. They all have them. I've been involved in the East Mentorship Program now. I've been involved in ACS, Women in Surgery Mentorship Program. AAST associate members, we now have a mentorship program that is ongoing right now. If you go on the website, and I'll put in the link here as soon as I find it, but if you go on the website, the application is due by, I think, August 31st. And you can apply for our mentorship program, pairs you with a senior mentor, and that like expands your network exponentially. And that really helps when you're kind of doing the job search and figuring out like the nitty gritties of what jobs you want to go to. Sorry, that's my plug.
All right, then I've got a sort of a two-parter that looks like it's on the nuts and bolts of CVs. One is, do you have any techniques or tricks you use to highlight especially important things or things that you're especially proud of? And then yeah, let's just do that for now. So I think what they're getting at is if you've got a very long list of publications, are you bolding things? Are you putting them out of order by impact factor or something like that to try to make the cream rise to the top?
Yeah, so I think that everything with the CV, it should be in a very logical order. So I think that, let's say if you are proud of the fact that, let's say you have a number of publications, I think it's, or certain publications, I think it's a little important to keep everything in chronological order. But I think the fact that you bold and underline your name in every publication that you have or every presentation that you do, I think that in and of itself really lets you shine just on its own. I think that's probably the best way to go about it, because you want to keep everything as logical and chronological as possible.
And I would just say that, like, back to the institutional comment I made earlier, our institution like requires us to do it a certain way. So if we, tried to do something that, was different, that they would end up like reverting us back to the Hopkins way or the Parkland way, right? So just something to keep in the back of your mind. But if there are things like that really stand out and they're important to you, those are awesome pieces to integrate in your interview process, right? And there's ways to do that don't come off as you're just trying to kind of brag about your publication, but to show the incredible work that you're doing.
Yeah, the second one that was on CV nuts and bolts was on all the local institutional lectures that you've given. Do you keep those on your CV or not? Yes,
and they go under local institutional talks, because those talks require the same amount of time, to invest in if you want to do a good job as the national talks. And along those lines, like, you should, any talk that you give, you want to be proud of. And so it's just like any piece that you write, you don't write a crappy piece because it's going to go on your own blog. People can still read that, right? So the same type of like quality work that you're doing for, your personal kind of, whether it's blog or institute, you should have that same level as if you were doing it nationally, in my humble opinion.
And then do you want to field one, or I can? I see there's a few more in the Q&A. Let's see.
I think we have to wrap it up soon. You want to do one more, and then?
Yeah. Ooh, now it's like a Hunger Games scenario. Which one is the best? All right, let's do the cover letter, because that's another good nuts and bolts. Yeah. So when applying and a cover letter is requested, what should generally be included in this letter?
I think with the cover letter, it's sort of similar to like the elevator pitch. You want to get across, who you are and what your overall plan is, and why you are specifically interested in the place that you're applying to, how your goals are going to mesh together, and how you would sort of benefit and thrive there. That's kind of my take on the cover.
Yeah, that's perfect. I don't have anything else to add to that. Not too long. Maybe I do have.
All right, well, I really want to take a second. We've reached time. So I just really want to thank Dr. Sheikh, Dr. Sakran for a wonderful session. Thanks enormously for your insights and sharing your experience. Thanks to all the audience members who participated and asked questions. We hope this was useful to you. I'm just going to put up, this is just a reminder that, again, this was the second in the series. The third one is going to be on October 14th, and that's going to be featuring, again, a group of really good speakers, Dr. Burns, Dr. Duncan, and Dr. Rotondo, and again, moderated by members of the AAST Associate Member Council. So it should be another great session, and this all, again, leads up to the virtual job fair, which is November 11th and 12th. So thanks again for everyone for attending. Thanks to our speakers, and hopefully see you at the next one.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.